Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Donald and welcome to my channel. I'm going to be doing a couple of examples of embossing on clay slabs today. Start off with, this is a piece of blue foam, blue insulating foam that you get for using on houses. I've peeled the protective plastic layer off of it, and I'm using a soldering iron to basically melt designs into the foam. What's nice about this is that with a hot soldering iron, you can draw really freely and easily in the surface, and this is going to allow me to create a negative. So when I roll a clay slab onto this, I'll actually get raised lines or an embossed positive. And raised lines are really difficult to do in ceramics. It's really easy to dig into the clay, but it's very, very hard to get just a small section to be raised. Usually the best you can do are stamps or adding clay in a really time-consuming way. So getting this kind of thing where you're going to have lots and lots of pattern and lots of lines, and each line is raised up off the surface, this is one of the easiest ways of doing it. This is similar to an older technique where people would do this on plaster slabs. If you gouge into the plaster and then you roll clay onto it, again, you'll get a raised line. Problem with the plaster is that it's a little bit harder, longer to do, and it's fragile. So after you've done it, you've got this heavy, fragile thing that you have to store delicately, where the surface gets scratched up. Great thing about the foam, it's not super fragile. I can dent this, but it's lightweight. I can put it up in the ceiling. I can put it on a tall shelf. I can put it on edge and store it. And I can do a lot of different types of decorations on it. Say, I would just start off, I like to start by just doing a basic drawing with marker, and then I can trace that with my soldering iron. If you're a little bit more confident than I am, maybe you just do it all in one shot, but I am a decent illustrator for a potter. So I like to have a first draft of things. Even then, I might slip a little bit. Now, one thing that I found out, which is kind of interesting, and I hadn't known about this process before I did it this time, one side of this foam had been painted. I kind of took this foam out of the ceiling of our garage. They had been using it for insulation, and it was just not doing anything. So I tore it all down and I put in 12-inch batting in the ceiling. So I have a lot of this kind of left over, but they'd actually painted it white so that it was more like a ceiling tile. And the side with the white paint on it, when I went to go and melt through this, it actually resists the heat just a little bit. And so I was able to get more control and finer lines on the painted side than I was on the unpainted side. So if I wanted a gestural line, if I was trying to just do something that looks like a life drawing or a sketch, I would have wanted to do that on the unpainted side, and it just flows straight through it. But if I wanted to do something very detailed, I would actually recommend that you put a coat of just latex paint or latex primer on this first, and then go through it, because it did slow it down just a little bit, which is interesting and kind of a cool side effect. Um, I was shown how to do this technique when I was in undergraduate. The head of our program, Tom Fardell, was the one that did a lot of this. And I think his main reason for doing this technique was that he would do fairly large textured slabs, and he was treating it more as like a one-off. Like he'd want to create something individually for that sculpture, and creating a big plaster slab and then doing it for just like one or two slabs is really wasteful, and again, heavy, fragile, difficult. So I think that was honestly, that when you're in undergraduate school, you don't ask as many questions as you should. And I've never really asked him specifically how he came about using this process. But really cool process to use. Let's go ahead and roll out a slab, and I'll show you what printing it out looks like. So I've got some clay, kind of a mixture here of some clays that are scrap, some that was pugged fairly recently. I'm going to unplug my dangerous hot soldering iron. And while I'm wedging this clay up, let me mention that one of the reasons why we use the blue foam and not like a white polystyrene is that the blue foam is supposed to be flame retardant, so that if you're in a house that's burning, the fumes from the foam don't knock you out and make it so that you die in your burning house. Because of that, it doesn't really fume a lot when you're heating it up. Still want to do it in a place with good ventilation, but it is not like if you were melting polystyrene. So I recommend doing this only with this, the blue, or it also comes in green, I believe. But this type of foam is the one to use for it. Let's see, I'm not going to get too crazy here. We'll do a couple of slab-like ones, narrower slabs for mugs. All right, so I'm doing ram's head wedging, and then I'm going to compress the clay on end. That makes it so that I'm getting 2 spiral compressions and a center compression point. And then when I squish it all on end, those 3 different types of grain pattern are going to overlap and give me something kind of like plywood. It'll be a lot stronger. All right, and then I'm going to start lengthening this out. And I want to keep flipping the clay, rotating the clay, and getting as much good compression on this as I can. And then I can start shaping it a little bit more with my rolling pin. When you're planning on doing slabs to emboss with this technique, I would recommend that you leave the clay a tiny bit, 1/16 of an inch thicker than you want your final product, so that you have enough extra clay to push down into the embossing. All right. Once I've got that, pretty good. There we go. I'm going to compress this with a metal rib. It seems like the intent here is to smooth. It is not. The intent is to compress. The side effect is that I'm smoothing. If I get any air bubbles, I can probably just compress those out at this point. If I cannot, I can pop the air bubble and then compress it. I'm actually not going to worry about that little hole too much because I'm about to put this into an embossing slab. So, you know what? Normally I would compress the other side, but I was just thinking it's going to be easier to just go ahead and put him on here. And there's a lot of different ways that you could do this. I'm actually going to do this one a little bit offset. I think that could be kind of fun. There you go. And then I'm going to want to go and compress this into the pattern, working all in one direction. And this is making sure these are fairly small lines, small marks. So making sure that it really goes into each one. I work my way across the whole slab. This foam is slightly porous, so it actually should release the clay from the foam. So now I'll compress the backside. It'll give me another chance to kind of push it into the holes. But it's actually drying the clay out a little bit as I'm doing this. So I'd say you have the first like minute or two. And then if it's laying on here, it's actually going to start to get stiff and it will start to fight you as far as wanting to go into those lines. Get it nice and compressed. There we go. And before I flip this over, I'm going to put down a bed sheet so I have a finer fabric texture than what I get from my canvas. And then I'm going to go ahead and peel this off. There we go. Just go nice and gradual. Give it a chance to come out of those holes. And there we are. And I get a great embossed pattern on there. The harder I hit it, the deeper it will go into those marks. So it's going to be kind of up to me how deep I want to get them. And if they're a little bit wider, you'll be able to get them a lot bigger, a lot more quickly. I'm going to go ahead and trim this. Use a straight edge and an angle to make sure I actually make a square piece for doing a mug. There we go. And I can use my angle piece right here. So I can mark that one. And if you want to know, say, how long should I actually do that to make the size cylinder that I want, I just roll out a little scrap slab, or slab, transposing all my words today for some reason, coil. There you go, that looks like that'd be a good size. So that'll tell me how long I want this to be. And I can get that trimmed. Okay. And then when I'm doing slab built cylinders, if I know which edge is going to be the drinking edge, I'll kind of round that off to begin with. And I actually think it's appropriate because it's very fabric-like. I'm going to do an overlapping seam instead of doing a 45-degree cut through the two parts of the wall. And I'll go ahead and shape this into my cylinder now, but I will not put it together yet. I'm going to let it kind of stiffen up, dry a little bit, already shaped. And then when it's stiffer, and I'm less likely to mess up this pattern that I put on the outside, later on, I'll come back, score the seam, and assemble it. So this should set aside for a minute. There we go. And keep one of these pieces for the bottom. That might be interesting. So you could see, it actually fits. There we go. That was done. All right, now I wanted to show one other type of embossing. And I will stop here for a second, go get my other materials, and be right back. All right, we'll start this in a sec. All right, and we're back. So I just took a second to gather a couple things together, roll out another slab here. I'm going to go ahead and compress this one. And then we're going to do soft foam embossing. So this last one, we used the insulating foam, which is a hard foam, and it gave us an embossed mark when we rolled onto it. And this time, we're actually going to take softer foam, and I like to support the slab that's going onto the foam either with a bed sheet or even a thin piece of plastic. And this is going to help with making it so that I don't get the foam texture on it and it doesn't like punch into it too much. All right, let's go ahead and it is just some pick and pluck foam that I had laying around. You can use any foam scraps for this. It just needs to be, I'd say, at least like inch, 3/4 of an inch thick, so you can push down and do it a little bit. Other than that, it's not really critical. Whatever you got laying around. If you pick up upholstery foam off the side of the road, make sure that you wash it really well. Hot water in case it has like bed bugs or something in it. Or you can leave it outdoors in the winter to freeze. That also works. Okay. So I'm just compressing this. Great. Now you can use different types of tools for doing this. I've got two different ones here. You can just use your finger, but different kinds are going to give you different sorts of marks. So like let's say I wanted to do Let's do a version of the herringbone real fast. It'll be nice to see compared to the other herringbone, kind of how that looks. Make a quick grid here. And I'm often telling people, just use a ruler. You want something to be accurate, just use a ruler. Funny how often people think I freehand everything. I'm not that good. I use a ruler. Cheat. Okay, got a little bit of a grid going there just so this goes a little bit faster. And I'm just going to push my tool into the clay. And because it's a soft surface behind it, that's going to give me a pattern. Go ahead and do this as quickly as I can out of sympathy for your viewing time. It's the only problem whenever I do these kinds of demos for my students, I try and get them like halfway done before I even bring them into the room because they're like, oh my God, you're going to actually do that in front of us. All right. That's why I didn't do too much of it. And you know what? Let's do part of the herringbone with one tool and part of it with another. And that'll be interesting to see on the other side when we flip it over. Now, while I'm doing this, let's talk a little bit about just this process of trying to stay loose, trying to stay playful in your process. It can be really difficult, especially for adult learners, to be able to just kind of experiment, try things. Everything that you do doesn't need to necessarily be something finished on its own. There's no such thing as bad information or bad knowledge. So even if a piece, quote, fails on me, meaning it isn't as successful or it isn't what I was intending, I'm going to learn from that process. So always, try and be easy on yourself as far as, try this. Maybe you punch through the slab or you don't like how it looks, but give yourself some breathing room to try new things, to try these processes, and just kind of see what you come up with. Because it, it's a hard way to live if you're always kind of feeling like you have to have everything turn into some great piece of artwork. Um, I'd say that's not really necessary. And for so many people, if you can relax in the process and enjoy it, you're going to end up having better work in the end. And you can see it. You can see it in the pieces. Who's bringing joy to it and who might be struggling a little. You're like, thanks. It made it even harder for me to try and do it. All right, and so I've got a couple of different lines here. Let's go ahead and do one with just my fingers. Let's call this one cinnamon rolls. And I'm just using a tiny bit of water just so that I can slide enough. The tools, I didn't have the same problem, but with my finger, I got to be careful that I'm not just digging in and tearing the clay. So I just need to be able to slide a little bit. All right, almost done. Now with this technique, unlike the first one, where we were able to kind of immediately shape it up right into a shape, into its final, like this is going to be a cup or something. This one would be a little more difficult to shape so early. I would say that you would leave it so that it can set for a few minutes at least. And it's more appropriate for doing things over some kind of like a drape mold or hump mold. Anyhow, so I've got my patterns into it and I'll flip it over and you can see it's just really satisfying. And compared to this kind of embossing, it's much softer, it's much more pillowy. It gives you a very different look and feel. But both of these are phenomenal for glazing. I mean, it's just really nice to use like a good runny glaze on them, especially you do this like in the inside of like a platter or a bowl or something. Really cool. Another thought for when you're doing something that's on this softer foam is that you can also get kind of a like a like an upholstery kind of a feel. Go ahead and move this one out of the way real quick, and my little pluck foam stuff's great for tool cases. All right, and I have one tiny little piece of clay left. My goodness, I went through all my clay. A lot of demos. All right, just gonna make a little one here so I can show you this one quick thought. Okay. All right, I'm gonna grab my foam again and another bed sheet. These are great for working on, partly just because you can always have a nice clean surface, a nice clean dry surface whenever you need one. Just have dozens of these laying around. All right. And so like, let's say I wanted to do, be good if I had some thought in my head before doing this. Let's make a quick grid. There we go. Something like this. Great. So if I flip this over, so I've got that faint grid there, I can also push from this side. And because I'm doing it onto the foam, I get much more of kind of like an upholstery feel. Like it's gonna dip in, and you can see that, and I just get this really nice kind of softness to it. That if I was stamping with this tool on something that was already early leather hard, it wouldn't divot in that same way, and you can really get some cool surfaces. And if I let this set up just a little bit, I could still bend it, but this would be really great for like inside of like a bowl or something along those lines. So anyhow, two different types of embossing using foam, and there's just a lot you can do with this. So experiment, give them a try, and you can even make yourself some test tiles, see how the glazing looks on these kinds of surfaces. But another tool for your toolbox. So thanks for joining me. Remember to subscribe if you want notifications about new videos. A lot more coming. Take care. See you soon.